give you an example is psychology. Psychology came from a very interesting 19th century in which introspection was, alternating with experiment. In linguistics, Noam Chomsky was also doing intuitive introspective research. Actually, the whole generative grammar, transformational grammar has been created through intuitions on an analysis of a single case basis. So think about it. A large part of linguistics, which was predominant for 50 years, came from this intuition from a single guy in linguistics. Saussure, the same, Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure. So now I'm telling you about psychology. It tried to distinguish itself from common folks psychology. That means the psychology of common people. And so it created the scientific method for psychology to study the psyche, to study the mind. Out of what? Out of natural sciences. Natural sciences was the model of psychology, and they created a form of thinking that they problematized around the experimental model. The experimental model was based on statistics that were relevant to natural science, agriculture to be precise. They used the model of agriculture to study the mind through experimental studies. And when you compare one fertilizer for a cornfield with fertilizer and a cornfield without fertilizer, you have very simple data. While when you study the brain and you study the brain with, say, using chewing gum, chewing gum during exams, and giving sugar during exams, and then you check the results of exams. And so you infer that one will be better for the mind, and you try to have a psychological theory explaining it. You apply the experimental method. Now, there are several problems with that. You know probably the results. Huh? The winner is chewing gum. If you chew gum during the exams, you are a winner. And the theory behind is because it relaxes you, while sugar is acidic and makes you more excited. So you have to have a theory. But the problem is it uses parametric statistics, parametric which are based on parameters, which are normal, like a bell curve, and a bell curve doesn't fit very well humans. Because in a classroom with people having an exam, you don't have an harmonious bell curve of people. You have people who did not study for their exam. So lots of people who are weak. Then you have average people. And then you have people who are outstanding and who worked a lot. So it's like a camel with three mounts, it's not a bell curve. And so the assumptions that the statistics that work for agriculture could work for psychology now have been relativized. However, they imposed it through a test. The test was the IQ test. Do you know what is IQ? IQ, intellectual quotient. Do you know the category on the bottom? Who knows? It's a bad word in English. You call them the morons. Above the morons, you have the idiots. And then you have the average, and then you have the layers at the top. Now, the big conquest of psychology in America has been political. That means it's a politics of science. They had to win over common sense psychology. They had to show they were really scientific. And for that, the IQ test was a winner. How did they do that? They introduced it through Binet-Simon. Binet-Simon, a French guy who created the IQ test, introduced it to Harvard. Harvard made a deal to impose it to all the soldiers of the US Army. Imagine the number of tens of thousands of soldiers who passed the test. Then it served placing out of the army those who could be dangerous with a gun, the morons, the idiots, and some others. Psychology, to impose itself in all universities, had to convince the politicians that it was good. There was a place that did resist. Chicago. The mayor of Chicago said, no, those are BS. I mean, IQ equal BS. That's the mayors of Chicago saying in 1929, 1932, he refused the IQ to be introduced in the schools, to be introduced at the University of Chicago. He said no. And just to show you, this example is to show you how much politics, how the battle to win the idea that a branch of learning is scientific, how this battle is by far very, very political. What happened is after 2 years of refusing entry of the IQ test to Illinois schools, then I don't know how they entered into the office of the mayor, but they brought the test and they said, you're doing a big mistake. It's so important. Psychology will have to understand the schools of Chicago, how students evolve from year to year at all grade levels, and how intelligence is developing. And he was still very, very skeptical, but he had 5 minutes. So they said, okay, dear mayor, please pass the test. And foolish he was, he agreed to pass the test. And then what happened? 2 days after, the Herald Chicago Tribune was front page publishing that their mayor was a moron. He had to relinquish his position. And that's the way the IQ and psychology gained the prestige of all the schools in Illinois. The thing is, the battle was on a political ground. The battle to win the idea that science would be experimental, would be deductive, and that there would be a science of the mind that would be exclusively scientific, quantitative, was won through political means. And what I'm telling you is, what's very interesting is, top universities such as Stanford, the lab of SRI at Stanford, they have been developing for years and years other types of techniques, other types of methodologies. They've been working on abduction, on intuition. They've been working on ideas that are very advanced to know if, for example, people could see at a distance. And they had research such as having 100 people receiving the picture of a person and the first name of the person, the age of the person, and the location of the person. And they had to say what they felt about that person after closing the eyes and feeling the picture and having the name of the person, the place of the person. Then they had to take note immediately of what ideas popped up in their mind. And it happened that most of the time they had at least one feature of the person. One feature could be, oh, I feel I have no arm. So they had chosen subjects who had one very specific thing, One was blind, one was amputated, one has a specific illness, hurting one, and so on and so forth. What was very, very interesting is when you test that on 100 persons, you see intuition works. Intuition brings valid knowledge. And then they had programs of sight at a distance. What do you see at a distance? If I told you who is currently using research methods that use the third inference process, I couldn't know which one to quote. In my mind, right now, I don't know who is doing that. So it means that we have been indoctrinated to consider that science is deductive, we start recognizing, going back to introspection and going back to induction. That means thinking, okay, narrative inquiry is useful. Narrative inquiry, case studies are not the types of studies that stay on dusty shelves. They are more like things that practitioners, teachers want to read and want to access to. Because what? Because they're close to life. If you read the lives of teachers, and you are a teacher, you want to read those lives because you learn from it things you can infer being useful for your profession. So that's very important when, that's the foundation of research methods. When we think in terms of research method, we have to think in terms of paradigm, conceptual frames, but also inference processes. And inference processes, do I intend to use deduction, induction, intuition, and why? Why do I believe this in the particular topic of my research? What do I think it would be a good process?